My name is Juliana Ward, and I am 24 years old. 2 weeks ago, I stood in a sweltering Texas University auditorium holding my honors degree in data analytics. I looked out at the sea of families in the audience. My eyes locked onto Section D, Row 8. 3 folding chairs sat empty. My parents, Richard and Diane, had skipped my graduation. They were 40 miles away at a local amateur barbecue competition because my older brother Connor decided to enter his brisket. That was the day I realized my life's work was invisible to the people who were supposed to love me most. But what none of them knew was that my invisible work was about to change everything. Just days after I walked that stage alone, my phone rang with a New York area code. The man on the other end was Elias Thorne, the CEO of Omnicorp, a logistics empire worth $25 billion. He did not want to schedule an interview. He wanted the predictive supply chain algorithm I built for my senior thesis, and he was offering a $5 million licensing deal to get it. Then my father called me from an unknown number demanding an urgent family meeting. I said yes. But I did not show up to play the dutiful daughter. I showed up to spring a trap. Before I tell you exactly what happened at that dinner table, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment below with your city and the current time. I love reading where you are tuning in from. Now let me take you back to the moment the illusion shattered. The Texas heat was radiating through the soles of my shoes as the dean called the names of the graduates. Every time a name echoed through the speakers, a different pocket of the arena erupted in cheers. Air horns sounded, mothers wept, fathers held up painted signs. I stood in line holding my breath. When the dean called Juliana Ward, summa cum laude, the silence from Section D felt heavier than the humidity. I walked across the stage. I smiled for the official photographer. I took my diploma and walked down the steps. I did not shed a tear. Crying would mean I expected something different from Richard and Diane. I walked out to the parking lot alone. The asphalt shimmered in the midday sun. I got into my car and turned on the engine just to get the air conditioning running. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. It was a social media notification. My mother had gone live. I stared at the screen as the video loaded. Diane was wiping her eyes with a paper napkin standing next to a smoking grill. Connor was holding a cheap plastic trophy. Third place in the amateur brisket division. My father, Richard, was beaming, clapping Connor on the shoulder, telling the camera that his boy was a natural-born winner. I sat in my car and watched my parents celebrate a weekend hobby while my 4 years of sleepless nights coding marathons and academic honors sat on the passenger seat wrapped in a ribbon. I turned off my phone. I put my car in drive. I did not know it yet, but my algorithm had already landed on the desk of an executive board that was bleeding hundreds of millions in inefficient Texas supply routes. My family saw a girl who was not worth celebrating. Elias Thorne saw a strategist who could predict logistical failures before they happened. When Richard called me a few days later, his voice held a synthetic warmth I had not heard in years. He said we needed to get the family together. He did not know about Omnicorp. He only knew that he needed something from me. I agreed to the dinner, knowing exactly what kind of financial ruin he was trying to hide. To understand why I agreed to walk into that dining room trap, you have to understand the specific brand of delusion that fueled my childhood home. I grew up in a mid-sized suburb outside of Dallas, where Friday night football was treated like a religion. My brother Connor was the high priest. He was the starting quarterback for his high school team. He had a strong throwing arm and a charming smile that made my parents completely blind to his actual capabilities. Connor threw one game-winning pass during a regional playoff game when he was 18. That single throw became the defining moment of his life. It also became the financial ruin of our family. My parents decided that a boy with that much natural talent was destined to become a millionaire. When Connor lost his college scholarship after one semester due to terrible grades, Richard and Diane did not hold him accountable. They pivoted. They convinced themselves that traditional education was holding back a visionary mind. They began draining their modest retirement accounts to fund his entrepreneurial dreams. First, it was an elite athletic training app that never made it past the wireframe stage. Then it was a premium energy drink distribution business that left our garage stacked with unsold inventory for 3 years. While Richard and Diane were busy underwriting Connor and his string of spectacular failures, I became a ghost in my own house. I learned early on that asking for help was a waste of breath. If I needed school supplies, I did not ask my mother. I found a way to earn the cash myself. The stark reality of my place in the family hierarchy crystallized during the summer I turned 17. I spent those 3 months working double shifts at a diner located right off the interstate highway. My goal was highly specific. I needed $450 to purchase a refurbished laptop from a local pawn shop. I wanted to learn how to write code. I can still smell the stale coffee and industrial bleach that clung to my uniform. I worked from 6 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon, taking orders, wiping down sticky vinyl booths, and refilling endless glasses of iced tea. My feet would swell so badly that my cheap sneakers felt like they were lined with crushed glass. But I never complained. Instead, I used my shifts to train my brain. I started analyzing the diner traffic patterns. I charted out the rush hours on the back of paper napkins. I realized that if I turned over my tables 12% faster during the lunch rush, I could increase my tip out by roughly $18 a week. I turned human behavior into a mathematical model. I was finding predictability in a world that felt entirely unstable. One humid Tuesday afternoon, I finished a grueling 10-hour shift. I walked into the break room, untied my grease-stained apron, and counted out my tips. I had exactly $462 in crumpled bills and heavy coins stuffed into my canvas bag. My shoulders ached, but my chest felt incredibly light. I had done it. I possessed the capital to buy the machine that would teach me how to build algorithms. I walked the 2 miles home in the blistering heat, picturing the cracked plastic casing of that second-hand laptop sitting in the pawn shop display case. I turned the corner onto our quiet suburban street and stopped dead in my tracks. A giant red bow was gleaming in the afternoon sun. It was attached to the hood of a brand new midnight blue Ford pickup truck parked squarely in our driveway. The sticker price on that model was well over $60,000. Connor was standing by the driver's side door, laughing loudly. He was 21 years old at the time, entirely unemployed, and currently living in his childhood bedroom rent-free. My father, Richard, was leaning against the tailgate holding a set of shiny keys. Diane was snapping photos with her phone, telling Connor to smile bigger for the camera. I walked up the driveway, my canvas bag heavy against my hip. The heat radiating off the pristine paint job of the truck felt like a physical blow. Richard noticed me approaching and offered a casual wave. "Look at this beauty, Juliana," he called out, his chest puffed with pride. "Your brother is starting a high-end landscaping consultation firm. He needs a reliable vehicle to meet with wealthy clients. You have to project success to attract success." I stood there staring at the leather interior and the chrome rims. I knew the math. I knew my father managed a regional hardware store, and my mother worked part-time at a dentist office. I knew the mortgage was already refinanced once to pay for the failed energy drink venture. Richard had just co-signed a massive high-interest auto loan for a son who had never held a job for more than 4 consecutive months. "Did you have a good shift, sweetheart?" Diane asked without taking her eyes off her phone screen. "Make sure you leave your work shoes on the porch." I did not scream. I did not ask why they could leverage their entire financial future for Connor, while I spent my teenage years scrubbing dried ketchup off tables to afford basic technology. I just nodded, left my shoes on the porch, and walked silently up the stairs to my room. I bought the refurbished laptop the next morning. I walked into the pawn shop, slapped the cash on the glass counter, and carried the heavy machine home like a prize. It was slow, and the fan whined like a jet engine, but it functioned. I sat on my bed surrounded by cheap textbooks I checked out from the public library, and I began to write lines of Python. Downstairs, I could hear the muffled sounds of Connor bragging to his friends about his new truck. Up in my room, I built my first data model. I realized then that human beings like my parents were irrational. They operated on emotion, delusion, and dangerous biases. They made terrible investments based on blind affection. Code did not do that. algorithms did not play favorites. Numbers were cold hard and entirely honest. If you built the structure correctly, the data would always reveal the truth. Coding became my armor. I stopped seeking validation from Richard and Diane because I understood they lacked the capacity to provide it. My analytical mind was born out of a desperate need to find order in a home governed by chaotic neglect. Every time I felt the sting of their dismissal, I just wrote better code. I learned to look at systems and immediately spot the vulnerabilities. I looked at Connor holding those truck keys, and I predicted the landscaping business would bankrupt within 8 months. I was off by only 2 weeks. I turned my isolation into a blade, and I spent the next 7 years sharpening it until it was lethal enough to catch the attention of a $25 billion corporation. I learned to predict logistical failures before they happened. I learned to identify bad investments from miles away. That same sharp edge is exactly what I brought to the table when Richard called me years later, demanding our urgent family meeting. The phone call came just hours after I finalized my contract with Omnicorp. As I sat in my Austin apartment holding the phone, I knew this was not a social call. His voice had a frantic, tight quality hiding beneath the fake warmth. Connor was supposedly running a new restaurant concept now. The historical data of my family indicated a severe financial crisis was brewing beneath the surface of this sudden desire to reconnect. I hung up the phone with my father and immediately opened a new tab on my browser. I did not feel a shred of daughterly concern. I only felt the familiar, calculated urge to gather the data. I picked up my phone again and dialed the number for David, my newly retained corporate attorney. The conflict was no longer about missing a graduation ceremony or a high-interest truck loan from my teenage years. It was about uncovering the exact dollar amount of the disaster Richard was trying to bury and setting a trap they would never see coming. To fully grasp the mechanics of the trap I eventually set, you have to rewind the timeline. 6 weeks before I walked across that stage alone, I made a phone call that permanently severed my remaining familial ties. It was a Tuesday evening. I was sitting at my cramped desk in my off-campus apartment. My thesis was submitted. My final grades were locked. I stared at the calendar tacked to my wall, where the second Saturday in May was circled in thick red ink. I dialed my mother's number, feeling a dull, familiar ache in my chest. I just wanted them to show up. The line rang 4 times before Diane picked up. Background noise bled through the speaker immediately. I heard the clatter of silverware and the loud, booming laugh of my brother. My mother sounded out of breath. "Juliana," she answered, her voice clipped. "Make it quick, please. We are testing spice rubs." "Mom," I said, keeping my tone even. "I am calling to confirm the logistics for graduation. The ceremony starts at 10 in the morning. I secured 3 tickets for the family section. I can email you the parking passes right now." A heavy silence stretched across the line. The clatter in the background stopped. I could picture the exact look on her face. Her brow furrowed, her lips pressed into a thin line of inconvenience. "Oh, sweetheart." Diane began using that practiced, soothing register reserved for delivering bad news. "Did we not tell you? That is the exact weekend of the Hill Country Amateur Pitmaster Showcase." I stared at my red circle on the calendar. "A barbecue showcase," I repeated. "Mom, I am graduating with honors. This is the culmination of 4 years of work." "You have to look at the bigger picture, Juliana," she sighed. "Connor is launching his new artisan smokehouse restaurant concept. This competition is a crucial networking event for him. There will be local investors tasting the brisket. We have to be there to support his pitch. He needs his family behind him." I processed the vocabulary she was using. A restaurant concept. Connor did not own a commercial kitchen. He did not have a business license. He had a rusty smoker in the backyard and a recipe he found on the internet. Yet my mother was talking about him like he was a seasoned restaurateur seeking venture capital. Before I could form a response, the phone shuffled. A deep voice took over the receiver. My father had intervened. "Listen, kid," Richard said, his tone flat and unyielding. "We are proud you finished your classes, but let us be realistic here. A ceremony is just an expensive photo opportunity. Your brother is out here grinding. He is building a tangible business. I am getting a degree in data analytics, Dad. I replied, my voice dropping to a cool whisper. I have a 3.9 grade point average. It is not just a photo opportunity. It is my career. A piece of paper does not teach you real-world grit, Richard countered, dismissing my entire academic existence with one sentence. Sitting in a library typing on a keyboard is easy. Connor is out here sweating, taking risks, putting his name on the line. Data modeling is pointless if you do not have the street smarts to back it up. We cannot abandon him on his big day just to watch you walk across a stage for 10 seconds. We will take you out to dinner the next time you visit. The line went dead. He hung up. I sat in the quiet of my apartment holding the silent phone. The rejection was final. They had weighed my concrete measurable success against Connor's imaginary restaurant and decided I was worth less. I closed my eyes. The familiar burn of grief flared in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I refused to shed a tear over their calculation. Instead, I opened my laptop. I visualized the phone call as a line of code. Input received, output generated, expectation adjusted to 0. I mentally logged the interaction into a ledger I had been keeping my entire life. The account was now closed. I would never ask them for anything again. The next afternoon, I walked across the quad to the Applied Sciences building. The Texas heat was already blistering, baking the concrete walkways. I headed straight for the basement computer lab where the servers hummed with a low, constant vibration. It was my sanctuary. I needed to run the final diagnostic checks on the predictive supply chain algorithm I had built for my thesis. I needed to bury my mind in numbers that made sense. The lab was empty except for one person. Dr. Sylvia Reyes was leaning against my assigned workstation reviewing a thick stack of printed schematics. Dr. Reyes was a formidable woman in her late 50s. She possessed sharp eyes, graying hair pulled into a tight knot, and a reputation for failing lazy students without a second thought. She did not tolerate excuses, and she rarely handed out compliments. She was the only person in the entire university who looked at me and saw someone worth pushing. She looked up as I dropped my backpack onto the linoleum floor. "You look like you just survived a shipwreck, Juliana," she noted, her voice cutting through the hum of the cooling fans. "Just navigating family logistics," I replied, pulling out a chair. "My algorithm is compiling faster than expected. The routing efficiency increased by 14% overnight." She tossed the stack of papers onto the desk. "I do not care about the 14%. I care about what this code actually represents. Sit down." I sat. Dr. Reyes pulled up a chair next to me, crossing her arms. She looked at me with a piercing intensity that made it impossible to hide. "I know you are walking that stage alone next month," she stated. "You do not talk about your parents. You work 3 part-time jobs to keep your tuition current. You spend your weekends in this basement writing predictive models while your peers are drinking cheap beer on 6th Street. You are hungry in a way that cannot be taught." I kept my eyes focused on the blinking cursor on my monitor. "I do what is necessary, Dr. Reyes, and that is why your code is brilliant," she continued. "You built an algorithm designed to anticipate failure in broken systems because you grew up inside a broken system. You know how to look at a chaotic supply chain and map out the exact moment the delivery will collapse. It is a masterpiece, Juliana." I felt my breath catch. Praise from Dr. Reyes was rarer than rain in August. "Thank you," I murmured. "Do not thank me yet," she said, leaning closer. "If you submit this through the standard academic channels, it will end up buried in a university journal. Some middle manager will steal the framework 5 years from now and take the credit. I am not going to let that happen. Your family is never going to fund your next step. You need leverage. You need capital." She reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out a sleek silver flash drive, placing it firmly next to my keyboard. "What is this?" I asked, staring at the drive. "2 weeks ago, I bypassed the thesis committee." Dr. Reyes explained, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial level. "I encrypted a demonstration model of your algorithm, and I sent it to a private corporate contact of mine in New York. A man who runs a logistics network currently bleeding $500 million a year in delayed freight and spoiled inventory. I told him I had a student who could fix his entire Southwestern routing grid in under 60 days. My heart hammered against my ribs. You sent my thesis to a corporate entity without telling me. I sent it because I knew you were too busy trying to survive to see the actual value of your own mind, she corrected. He ran your model through their historical data last night. Your algorithm accurately predicted every single bottleneck his company experienced over the last 3 fiscal quarters. He was stunned. Dr. Reyes stood up, smoothing the lapels of her jacket. She looked down at me with a fierce, protective pride. His name is Elias Thorne, she said, letting the name land between us. He is the chief executive officer of Omnicorp. He has an executive team flying into Austin right after your graduation. They are not coming to offer you an entry-level data entry position, Juliana. They are coming to buy your algorithm, and they are bringing a checkbook. She turned and walked toward the heavy lab doors, leaving me sitting in the hum of the servers. Get your presentation ready, Ward, she called over her shoulder. The real world is about to knock. I stared at the silver flash drive. The pain of my father's dismissal, the sting of my mother's barbecue excuse. It all evaporated in the cool, conditioned air of the basement. Richard thought I lacked real-world grit. He thought my degree was a pointless piece of paper. He had no idea that while he was busy gambling his home equity on a backyard smoker, I had just secured the keys to a $25 billion empire. The trap was not fully constructed yet. I still had to endure the silence of graduation day. But as I picked up the flash drive and felt the cold metal against my palm, I knew the shift in power had already begun. My family was about to learn a brutal lesson about the true cost of their neglect. The indoor stadium smelled of stale popcorn and nervous anticipation. Thousands of folding chairs lined the basketball court. Families packed the bleachers all the way to the rafters. The university chancellor stood at the podium delivering a long speech about the future. I did not hear a single word of it. My heart beat a steady rhythm against my ribs as the long line of graduates shifted forward. We were moving alphabetically. The letter W was approaching. Every time a student stepped up to the microphone, a different section of the arena exploded into cheers. Relatives blew plastic horns. They stomped their feet on the metal bleachers. They held up neon poster boards covered in glitter. I stood in the queue, clutching the hem of my black robe. I kept my eyes fixed on the left side of the lower bowl. Section D, row 8, seats 4, 5, and 6. I had reserved them 3 months ago. I paid extra to secure the aisle view so my father could stretch his legs. The navy blue plastic seats remained empty. No one was rushing down the concrete stairs late. No one was waving a printed program to catch my attention. When I was 10 years old, I used to sit on our front porch step for hours on Saturday afternoons. I would wait for my parents to drive back from Connor's traveling league baseball games. They always promised they would take me to the neighborhood park when they returned. They never did. They would pull into the driveway exhausted and order me to carry my brother's heavy equipment bags inside the house. Today felt exactly like sitting on that concrete step. I was still waiting for a car that was never going to arrive. The dean leaned into the microphone. Juliana Ward, he announced, summa cum laude. I stepped into the harsh glare of the stage spotlights. Silence rushed in to fill the space where my family should have been cheering. A few polite claps rippled from the front rows. It was the courtesy applause reserved for the students nobody claimed. I walked across the wooden floorboards. I reached out and took the leather-bound diploma cover from the university president. I smiled for the official photographer standing at the bottom of the stairs. The camera flash blinded me for a fraction of a second. I kept my spine straight. I walked back down the aisle to my folding chair and sat. The silence from Section D felt like a physical weight pressing against my shoulders. The ceremony concluded an hour later with a storm of flying caps and orchestral music. I did not throw my cap into the air. I tucked it under my arm and merged into the sea of black robes, pushing toward the exit doors. The moment I stepped out of the arena, the Texas afternoon heat hit me. The air was thick and punishing. I navigated through the crowded parking lot. Everywhere I looked, I saw living evidence of the support I lacked. I watched a father wrap his arms around his daughter, lifting her off the ground in celebration. I sidestepped a grandmother wiping joyful tears from her cheeks, while adjusting her grandson's collar. Families clustered around cars exchanging gifts and posing for group photos. I walked past all of them. I kept my head down until I reached my faded silver sedan parked near the back chain-link fence. I unlocked the door and slid into the driver's seat. The interior of the car was an oven. The steering wheel burned my palms. I did not start the engine right away. I dropped the leather diploma cover onto the passenger seat. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My thumb hovered over the screen. I opened my social media feed. The algorithm instantly refreshed. The first item to populate was a live broadcast from my mother. I tapped the screen and the audio filled the sweltering cabin of my car. Country music blared in the background of the video. Smoke drifted lazily across the frame. Diane stood in front of a sprawling white vendor tent. She was wearing a cheap cotton shirt printed with the words, "Connor's Artisan Smokehouse." She held her phone with one hand and used her other hand to aggressively wipe her eyes. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her mascara. She rotated the camera to reveal Connor. He was wearing a grease-stained apron over a tank top. He held a plastic trophy shaped like a pig. It was spray-painted gold. The engraved plate on the base read Third Place Amateur Brisket Division. My father Richard stepped into the frame and threw his arm around Connor's neck. He squeezed my brother tight. Richard looked directly into the camera lens. "He is a natural genius," my father shouted over the background noise. "I told you all this boy was destined for greatness. Look at this trophy. This is just the beginning." Diane turned the camera back to her own tear-stained face. "We are just so proud," she sobbed into the microphone. "Hard work pays off." I stared at the bright screen. I looked at the plastic pig. I looked at the leather diploma cover resting on my passenger seat. I had spent 4 years sacrificing sleep and sanity to master predictive data modeling. I had earned the highest academic distinction the university offered. My parents skipped it to cry tears of joy over a third-place finish in a backyard meat cooking contest. The juxtaposition was beyond insulting. It was a clear, undeniable metric of my non-existent value in their lives. I was about to throw my phone onto the floorboards when a sharp rap on the driver's side window made me jump. I turned my head. Dr. Sylvia Reyes stood outside my car. She was wearing a sharp charcoal blazer despite the suffocating heat. She held a thick manila folder tucked under her left arm. I quickly wiped my face, rolling down the manual window. The hot air poured inside. "What are you doing out here, Dr. Reyes?" I asked. My voice sounded thin and raspy. She rested her hands on the rim of the open window. She looked at my face, and then glanced at the phone still glowing in my lap. She did not offer pity. She offered a recalibration. "I told you the real world was coming, Juliana," she said. "I am here to make the formal introduction." She reached through the open window and dropped the heavy folder onto my lap, directly on top of my phone. It covered the image of my weeping mother. The folder was stamped with a gold-embossed seal. The emblem belonged to Omnicorp. "Open it," Dr. Reyes instructed. I peeled back the thick paper flap. Inside sat a single crisp sheet of corporate letterhead. It was not a generic recruitment brochure. It was a direct line of communication. The document contained a private cell phone number, an encrypted email address, and an access code for a secure video conference server. The signature at the bottom read Elias Thorne, Chief Executive Officer. "They finished reviewing your diagnostic test yesterday afternoon," Dr. Reyes explained. Her voice was steady and commanding. "Your algorithm identified a cascading failure in their Dallas distribution hub that their senior analysts missed for 6 months. Elias Thorne manages a fleet of 10,000 transport vehicles and a supply chain spanning 3 continents. He wants a meeting. He does not want to talk to a corporate recruiter. He does not want to talk to me. He wants to talk to the architect. He wants you." I stared at the bold signature printed on the page. My hands stopped shaking. The air inside the car still felt like a furnace, but my chest suddenly turned ice cold. I looked back at the empty arena in the distance. I thought about the 3 empty navy blue seats in Section D. I thought about Richard praising Connor for a plastic trophy while dismissing my intellect as pointless. For 24 years, I had structured my life around trying to earn a seat at their table. I had starved myself of pride waiting for a scrap of validation from people who fundamentally lacked the capacity to give it. I touched the gold seal on the folder. I realized I was holding the keys to a different kingdom entirely. I did not need to beg for a seat at Richard and Diane's table. I was about to buy the entire building. "Thank you, Dr. Reyes," I said. My voice was no longer thin. It held the firm cadence of certainty. She gave me a single sharp nod. "Make them pay what you are worth, Ward," she ordered. She stepped away from the car and walked back toward the campus. I rolled up the window, sealing out the oppressive heat. I placed the Omnicorp folder on the passenger seat right on top of my diploma. I reached forward and turned the ignition key. The engine roared to life. The air conditioning kicked in, blasting cold air against my face. I shifted the car into drive. I pulled out of the parking space, leaving the arena and the celebrating families behind me. I merged onto the highway, heading toward the city. I looked in my rearview mirror one last time. The campus grew smaller until it vanished entirely. The desperate girl waiting for her parents to show up vanished with it. Tuesday morning arrived with a suffocating heat that pressed against the thin windows of my off-campus apartment. I sat at my cheap particle board desk and adjusted the camera on my laptop. At exactly 9 o'clock, I entered the encrypted access code Dr. Reyes had provided. The screen went dark for a fraction of a second, before splitting into a high-definition grid of pristine corporate boardrooms. The men and women on the screen wore immaculate tailored suits. They sat in glass-walled offices overlooking the Manhattan skyline. At the center of the grid was Elias Thorne. He possessed sharp features, piercing eyes, and silver hair. He did not waste time with pleasantries or small talk. He leaned toward his camera and unmuted his microphone. "Miss Ward," he began, "my senior analysts spent the entire weekend attempting to tear your data model apart. They tried to break your code. They fed your algorithm 3 years of our worst logistical disasters. They inputted historic hurricanes, labor strikes, and fuel shortages. Your code did not break. It anticipated every single failure an average of 4 days before the bottleneck actually occurred." I kept my posture relaxed. I looked directly into the camera lens. I did not let my voice tremble. "We are losing over $300 million annually on Texas supply routes alone," Elias continued. "Our delivery metrics are failing. We are bleeding capital on spoiled inventory and misallocated freight. My question to you is simple. How does a 24-year-old college student fix a problem that my veteran logistics team cannot solve?" "Because your veteran team is reacting to failures," I replied. My voice was steady and clinical. "My algorithm does not react. It predicts. I mapped out the inherent instability of human decision-making within your routing protocols. Your current system relies on dispatchers making judgment calls during a crisis. Humans panic. Humans possess bias. I removed the human element. My code recalculates risk probabilities in real time and reroutes your freight fleets before the crisis even forms." A heavy silence fell over the digital boardroom. Several executives exchanged loaded glances. Elias Thorne steepled his fingers and stared at me through the lens. The skepticism in his eyes vanished. It was replaced by intense, calculating respect. "You understand the value of what you have built," he stated. It was not a question. It was an acknowledgement of power. "Yes," I answered. "That is exactly why I'm sitting here." Elias nodded once. He typed briefly on his keyboard. A notification chimed on my laptop. A digital contract appeared in my secure inbox. "We want exclusive global rights to your algorithm," he said. "We are offering a $5 million licensing buyout. The capital will be wired to your accounts immediately upon execution. But we also want you to oversee the integration. We are creating a new executive position for you based out of our regional headquarters in Austin. Lead predictive strategist. Your starting base salary is $300,000 a year with full equity vesting options. Review the terms." I opened the document. I read the stark legal language. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but my hands remained perfectly still. I did not negotiate because the terms were flawless. I clicked the electronic signature box. I typed my full name. I hit submit. The entire transaction took less than 3 minutes. I closed my laptop and exhaled. I had just altered the trajectory of my entire bloodline. By Friday afternoon, I had terminated the lease on my cramped apartment. I packed my clothes and my computer into the trunk of my faded sedan. I drove straight into the heart of downtown Austin. The signing bonus had cleared my bank account that morning. Seeing a string of 7 numbers sitting in my checking balance felt entirely surreal. It acted as an impenetrable shield against the world. I walked into the leasing office of a newly constructed high-rise building overlooking the Colorado River. The lobby smelled of expensive cedarwood and polished marble. The leasing agent initially looked at my casual clothes with polite dismissal. Her attitude shifted dramatically when I provided my financial statements. She showed me a penthouse unit on the 34th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic, breathtaking view of the city skyline. The kitchen featured dark quartz countertops and commercial-grade appliances. The floors were imported hardwood. I signed a 2-year lease and paid the entire sum upfront via a direct wire transfer. I stood in the center of the empty living room, looking out over the sprawling city below. The Texas sun was setting, casting a golden glow across the water. I was 24 years old. I was a millionaire. I was entirely alone, and I had never felt more secure. As I watched the sunset, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was the family group chat. My mother, Diane, had named the thread the Ward Clan. I opened the notification. Connor had sent a picture of a rusted commercial meat smoker sitting on a cracked concrete patio. "Big moves coming," he typed. "I am meeting with a private lender tomorrow to secure the bag. The smokehouse is going national." Diane immediately replied with a string of clapping hand emojis. She wrote, "So proud of your hustle, honey. You are a true visionary. We always knew you were destined for greatness." Richard chimed in moments later. "That is my boy. Hard work always pays off. Tell us when you need us to co-sign the equipment leases. We have your back." I read the messages while standing barefoot on the imported hardwood floors that my intellect had purchased. Connor was bragging about a phantom restaurant empire while openly begging for co-signers to fund his delusions. I was holding a $5 million corporate contract, and I did not utter a single word to correct them. Diane sent a separate, direct text message to me a few minutes later. "Juliana," she wrote, "I saw an opening for an administrative assistant at the dental clinic where I work. You should apply tomorrow. It is a steady paycheck while you figure out what to do with your data degree. It pays $15 an hour. Let me know if you want me to put in a good word with the manager." I stared at her message. The sheer arrogance of her assumption was breathtaking. She assumed I was struggling to survive. She assumed I needed her help to secure a low-wage desk job. She still viewed me as the helpless teenager scrubbing tables at the diner. She had no concept of the predator I had become. I did not reply to her message. I did not send a picture of my penthouse view to the group chat. I locked my phone and tossed it onto the dark quartz kitchen counter. I let them continue to believe I was a failure. Over the next 3 weeks, I lived 2 separate lives. During the day, I drove to the Omnicorp regional office. I took the private elevator to my corner suite. I led a team of senior data analysts who were a decade older than me. We integrated my code into the global logistical network. Freight delays dropped by 20% in the first 14 days of operation. Elias Thorne flew down from New York just to shake my hand in person. He treated me as an equal. He respected my mind. He paid me for my exact worth. In the evenings, I returned to my quiet penthouse. I would pour a glass of sparkling water and watch the family group chat light up with their collective financial suicide. Connor posted constant updates about his supposed restaurant. He talked about securing prime commercial real estate. He talked about hiring expensive contractors to remodel a dining room. He used business buzzwords he clearly did not comprehend. Richard and Diane cheered him on every single step of the way. But my academic training in predictive modeling told me a very different story. I knew the commercial real estate market in our area. I knew the leases required significant upfront capital. Connor possessed terrible credit and zero collateral. Richard earned a modest salary as a retail manager. The only way they could possibly fund this reckless venture was by taking on unregulated toxic debt. They were walking blindly into a financial slaughterhouse. The tension of holding my secret felt exquisite. Every time they sent a condescending text asking if I had found a real job, yet I felt a cold surge of satisfaction. I was building a quiet empire while they were digging their own graves. I knew the truth could not stay hidden forever. In the modern corporate world, a $5 million tech acquisition does not remain a secret. My name was already circulating through industry channels. It was only a matter of time before the data leaked into the public domain. I waited patiently for the inevitable explosion. 3 weeks melted into the brutal Texas summer. I settled into my corner office at the Omnicorp regional headquarters. The transition from a struggling college student to a corporate executive felt surprisingly natural. My days consisted of analyzing freight grids, optimizing delivery metrics, and directing teams of senior engineers. The chaotic noise of my childhood felt like a distant memory here. I was insulated by thick glass walls, leather chairs, and the quiet hum of central air conditioning. Down in the Dallas suburbs, my family continued their reckless descent into financial ruin. My personal cell phone sat on my mahogany desk, vibrating with the usual group chat updates. Connor sent a photo of a rusted key dangling from his index finger. The text read, "Commercial lease secured. Time to build the empire." I stared at the image of the key. Connor had always been obsessed with the performance of success rather than the mechanics of it. When we were children, he would spend hours polishing his football helmet, but refused to study the actual playbook. He wanted the spotlight without the sweat. A commercial lease required a significant capital injection. You needed first and last month's rent as security deposit and proof of operating funds. I knew he possessed no liquid assets. He did not even own a savings account. Someone was bankrolling his fantasy, and the math pointed directly to Richard and Diane. I ignored his message and turned my attention back to my dual monitors. At exactly 10:15 in the morning, my office phone rang. It was the director of corporate public relations for Omnicorp calling from New York. He reached out to inform me that our press embargo had officially lifted. A premier financial journal was publishing a feature piece on the company optimizing its southern supply chain. The article highlighted the architect behind the turnaround. He told me to brace myself. The corporate world was about to learn my name. I opened a new browser tab and navigated to the financial news homepage. There it was. The banner headline occupied the very top of the screen. Texas data prodigy Juliana Ward signs $5 million tech deal with Omnicorp. I clicked the link. The article detailed my thesis, my predictive algorithm, and my rapid ascension to lead predictive strategist. It included a professional headshot taken in the Omnicorp lobby. The journalist laid out the financial terms in plain English. A $5 million licensing buyout, a $300,000 base salary, full equity vesting options. The piece described me as a rising star in the logistics tech sector. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and waited. I pulled up the stopwatch application on my phone. I pressed start. I wanted to quantify the exact speed of human greed. The timer ticked upward. 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I watched the numbers roll over with a clinical detachment. At exactly 14 minutes and 32 seconds, the dam broke. My phone screen illuminated. The device began to vibrate persistently against the polished wood of my desk. A notification popped up from Aunt Brenda. Brenda was my mother's older sister. She was a woman who routinely forgot my birthday, but sent Connor a crisp $100 bill every Christmas. Her message read, "Juliana, my goodness, we just saw the news online. We are so incredibly proud of you. We need to get lunch soon. Let us catch up." Before I could even read the entire sentence, another text arrived. Then another. The notifications stacked on top of each other in a dizzying cascade. Uncle Thomas sent a congratulatory message claiming he always knew I had a brilliant mind. Cousin Sarah, who had not spoken to me since my high school graduation, asked if I was hiring interns for my new department. The phone danced across the desk, fueled by the incoming barrage. I watched the screen glow with morbid fascination. I picked up the device and opened my call log. I scrolled back through the weeks until I reached the second Saturday in May, graduation day. The call log for that date was entirely blank. Zero incoming calls, zero voicemails, zero messages asking where to park or what time the ceremony started. I toggled back to the present day. In the span of a single hour, my phone registered 47 missed calls, 47 desperate attempts to reach the daughter they had collectively discarded. The family group chat, which had been a dedicated shrine to Connor's barbecue ambitions, suddenly shifted focus. Richard was the first to pivot. He sent a rapid-fire string of messages to the group thread. Juliana, what is this article talking about? $5 million. Is this some kind of internet joke? Call your mother right now. Diane followed up 2 minutes later with a direct text message to my private number. Her tone shifted dramatically from the condescending woman offering me a minimum wage receptionist job at a dental clinic. She was now a frantic mother demanding inclusion. Juliana, honey, why did you keep this a secret from us? We are your family. We should be celebrating together. Please pick up the phone. Connor is so excited for you. We love you so much. I did not pick up the phone. I picked up my coffee cup and took a slow, measured sip. I felt no anger. I felt no sorrow. I only felt the cold, precise satisfaction of validated data. The numbers told a flawless, indisputable story. My family did not value my intellect. They did not value my academic honors or my grueling work ethic. They valued the currency those honors could generate. The $5 million price tag was the only language they truly understood. They were drawn to the capital like moths to a porch light. I let the phone continue to ring. I wanted their panic to marinate. I wanted their sudden desperation to steep in the silence I had endured for my entire life. They were sitting in their suburban homes staring at a headline that shattered their carefully constructed narrative. The scapegoat they had ignored was a corporate millionaire. The golden boy they had worshipped was playing with a rusted key to a doomed restaurant. The power dynamic had inverted in the span of 14 minutes. I watched a new voicemail notification pop up from Richard. He was likely pacing his living room demanding answers from a machine. I could picture the tension in his jaw. I could imagine Diane wringing her hands, wondering how to spin her absence at my graduation into a misunderstanding. They were losing control of the narrative, and it terrified them. I muted the device and placed it face down on my desk. I knew Richard would not give up. He would find a way to reach me outside of the blocked numbers and ignored group chats. He needed a bailout for whatever financial mess he had created with Connor, and I possessed the deepest pockets in the state. I smiled and went back to my spreadsheets. The trap was primed. I just had to wait for him to step into it. It took my father exactly 48 hours to realize his direct lines of communication were permanently blocked. I was sitting at my desk reviewing a logistics forecast for the upcoming quarter when my private corporate cell phone rang. The screen displayed an unknown local Austin area code. Very few people possess this specific number. I assumed it was one of the OmniCorp regional directors returning a call about a supply chain bottleneck. I picked up the device and answered with my standard professional greeting. Juliana. The voice on the other end was bright and dripping with a synthetic sugar that made my stomach tighten. It is your father. I pulled the phone away from my ear for a fraction of a second. I stared at the screen. Richard had circumvented my digital barriers by purchasing a prepaid burner phone. The man who could not be bothered to drive 40 miles to watch me accept my university diploma had navigated to a convenience store, bought a temporary device, and loaded it with minutes just to bypass a blocked number. The effort alone signaled a level of desperation that my predictive models had not fully anticipated. I brought the phone back to my ear. I did not speak. I let the silence stretch across the line, forcing him to fill the void. We saw the article in the Financial Journal, Richard continued. His tone was buoyant and entirely stripped of the condescending edge he used during our last conversation 6 weeks ago. Our little genius. Making headlines and signing big corporate contracts. We are just bursting with pride over here. I processed the phrase, our little genius. In 24 years of existence, Richard had never once attached that word to my name. When I won the regional mathematics decathlon at 14, he called it a nice little hobby. When I secured a full academic scholarship to the university, he told me to make sure I did not lose it because he was not paying a dime for my tuition. My intellect had always been a nuisance to him. It was an inconvenience that highlighted his own shortcomings. But the moment a financial publication attached a $5 million valuation to my brain, I suddenly became a genius. The currency had altered my title. I maintained a flat, neutral tone. "Hello, Richard." "Oh, come on now," he chuckled softly. "It is, Dad. Listen, Juliana, your mother and I want to celebrate your success properly. We know we have been busy lately with your brother's projects, but we want to make it up to you. We are hosting a special family dinner this Friday at the house, just the four of us. Your mother is going to make her famous pot roast. We want to hear all about this new executive job of yours." The mention of the pot roast was a brilliant miscalculation on his part. It was a detail that further proved they knew absolutely nothing about the daughter they were pretending to cherish. I despised pot roast. The texture of the boiled meat and the heavy gravy made me nauseous. It was Connor's favorite meal. Diane prepared it every year for his birthday. Richard was using my brother's favorite dinner as a lure to trap me. I knew exactly what this was. This was not a celebration. This was an ambush. Connor had sent a picture of a commercial lease key to the group chat days prior. Commercial real estate in Travis County required a mountain of upfront capital. They needed a bailout, and they had just read an article confirming I possessed $5 million in liquid assets. Most people in my position would have hung up the phone. They would have changed their number and walked away from the toxicity. But I did not want to just walk away. I wanted to dismantle the illusion they had built. I wanted to watch them try to execute their extortion pitch. "Friday at 7 works for me," I replied smoothly. "I will see you both then." "Wonderful," Richard said, his voice exhaling a breath of profound relief. "We cannot wait, sweetheart. Drive safe." He disconnected the call. I placed the burner phone number on a designated monitoring list and set the device down on my desk. The trap was set on their end. Now it was time to build mine. I picked up my desk phone and dialed the direct line for David. David was the senior corporate attorney I had retained during my contract negotiations with Omnicorp. He operated out of a high-end law firm located 3 blocks away from my penthouse. David was meticulous and entirely devoid of sentimentality. He viewed the law as a structural framework to be exploited and weaponized. He charged a premium hourly rate, and he was worth every single penny. David answered on the second ring. "Ward, what is the emergency?" "There is no emergency," I stated, leaning back in my chair. "But I do need you to initiate a comprehensive financial autopsy." "Give me the targets," he replied. I could hear the clatter of his keyboard in the background. "Richard Ward and Connor Ward," I instructed. "Run a full sweep of Travis County public records. I need you to pull every single document attached to their social security numbers and any limited liability corporations they have formed in the last 36 months. David paused his typing. "Travis County is a large jurisdiction. What exactly are we hunting for?" "My brother recently bragged about securing a commercial lease for a restaurant," I explained. "He possesses no credit history and zero capital. My father manages a regional hardware store. Neither of them has the financial architecture to secure a prime commercial lease in this real estate market on their own. Someone is guaranteeing the debt. Someone is signing the loans." "You think your father leveraged his assets to fund the restaurant?" David asked. His voice sharpened with professional curiosity. "I do not think it—" "I know it," I replied. "I just need you to locate the exact paperwork that proves it. I want property deeds. I want bank liens. I want uniform commercial code filings. If they took out a second mortgage, I want to see the origination date. If contractors have filed mechanic liens against the restaurant property, I want copies of the complaints. Pull the guarantor's signatures on the commercial lease." "You are asking for a complete teardown of their financial lives," David noted. "This kind of deep dive takes time. I have to pull records from the county clerk and run searches through the state banking commission. You have 48 hours, I said. I am attending a family dinner on Friday night. They invited me to celebrate my recent corporate success. It is a thinly veiled extortion attempt. They are going to pitch me on an investment opportunity to save whatever sinking ship they have boarded. I am not walking into that dining room blind. I need to know the exact dimensions of the disaster they are trying to cover up. I could hear the faint sound of David smiling through the phone receiver. He enjoyed tearing apart bad contracts and exposing fraudulent financial maneuvering. He thrived on the cold, hard reality of documented evidence. Consider it done, David promised. I will deploy my junior associates to scour the county database immediately. If your father and brother signed any binding financial documents in the state of Texas, I will find them. I will have a bound dossier on your desk by tomorrow afternoon. Thank you, David. Spare no expense. I hung up the phone and looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office. The Austin skyline stretched out before me, glittering in the afternoon sun. Down in the suburbs, my father was likely pacing his living room, congratulating himself on his successful phone call. He believed he had successfully manipulated his estranged daughter with a few sweet words and an invitation to dinner. He thought I was still the invisible girl, eager for a scrap of parental affection. He had no idea that I had just unleashed a team of corporate lawyers to dissect his entire life. The dinner table was being set, but I was the one writing the menu. I turned back to my logistics forecasts and let the anticipation build. By tomorrow afternoon, the curtain would be pulled back entirely. The raw, unedited truth of the Ward family finances was about to be unearthed, and I was going to read every single line. Thursday afternoon arrived with a heavy blanket of storm clouds gathering over the Austin skyline. I was sitting in my office at the logistics headquarters, reviewing the final integration reports for my predictive algorithm. The integration was proceeding flawlessly. The numbers on my screen were green and stable. But my mind was not fully focused on the corporate freight routes. I was waiting for the financial autopsy of my own family. At exactly 4 in the afternoon, the private line on my desk rang. I picked up the receiver and heard David breathing steadily on the other end of the connection. "I have the entire picture, Ward," he said. His voice was devoid of any humor. "It is much worse than you anticipated. Tell me the exact figures," I instructed, grabbing a heavy pen and a yellow legal pad. David began to lay out the forensic accounting. He explained that Connor did not just sign a standard commercial lease for a restaurant property. He signed a 10-year binding agreement on a premium retail space in a highly trafficked commercial district. The landlord required significant upfront collateral. Because Connor possessed a credit score resembling a total default, the landlord demanded an ironclad guarantor. My father, Richard, stepped in to fill that role. But Richard did not possess the liquid capital to guarantee a long-term commercial lease. He managed a local retail store and earned a modest salary. To secure the funds, Richard went to a secondary lending institution and took out a second mortgage on the family home. He extracted $350,000 of equity in a single lump sum. I stopped writing on the yellow notepad. I stared at the Austin skyline through the glass walls of my office. The family home was a modest 3-bedroom property in the suburbs. Richard and Diane had spent 30 years paying off that original mortgage. It was their only tangible asset. It represented their entire retirement safety net. Richard had pledged 3 decades of his life to secure a backyard barbecue fantasy for a son who had never succeeded at anything. "It gets worse," David continued. The $350,000 evaporated almost instantly. "Where did the capital go?" I asked. "Connor hired a series of unlicensed contractors to gut the commercial space," David explained. "He attempted to build a custom industrial kitchen without pulling the proper municipal permits. The city inspectors shut down the construction site 3 weeks ago due to severe code violations. The electrical wiring was a fire hazard, and the commercial ventilation system was installed backward. When the project halted, Connor stopped paying the construction crews. David detailed the resulting legal fallout. 3 separate mechanic liens had been filed against the property in the last 14 days. The plumbing company, the drywall crew, and the electrical union were all suing Connor for unpaid labor and materials. The restaurant was legally paralyzed. It was a rotting shell of half-finished drywall and exposed wires. It would never open its doors to a single paying customer. I listened to the steady rhythm of David listing the legal complaints. The sheer magnitude of the incompetence was staggering. But it was the next piece of information that truly locked the trap into place. The secondary lender who issued the mortgage against your parents' house caught wind of the mechanic liens, David said. They invoked a material breach clause in the loan agreement. Because the capital was squandered and the collateral was compromised, the bank accelerated the repayment schedule. What is the timeline? I asked. David paused for a second before delivering the fatal blow. They issued a formal pre-foreclosure notice on Monday morning. Richard and Diane have exactly 30 days to produce $350,000 in cash. If they fail to clear the debt, the bank seizes the suburban house. They will be evicted before the end of the summer. The timeline snapped into perfect clarity. The pre-foreclosure notice was delivered on Monday. On Tuesday, the Financial Journal published the article detailing my $5 million corporate licensing deal. On Wednesday, Richard purchased a burner phone to bypass my communication blocks and invite me to a celebratory family dinner. The dinner was not an olive branch. It was a desperate, calculated extortion attempt. They were drowning in a self-created ocean of debt, and they saw my newly acquired wealth as their only life raft. There is one final detail you need to see, David added. I am sending a secure encrypted file to your email right now. Open it and look at page 4 of the commercial lease agreement. I clicked the notification on my monitor and downloaded the scanned legal document. I scrolled past the boilerplate language and the property dimensions until I reached the signature page. I saw Connor's messy scrawl on the primary tenant line. Below his name was the signature of the guarantor. Richard had signed his full legal name in dark blue ink, but there was a third signature line resting at the very bottom of the page. It was designated for a spousal guarantor. I stared at the delicate cursive handwriting, Jessica Ward. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Jessica was Connor's wife. They had been married for 2 years. She was a kindergarten teacher who drove a 10-year-old sedan and spent her weekends grading finger painting projects. She was remarkably sweet and entirely naive. When I was struggling to pay for my college textbooks, she once slipped a $20 bill into my jacket pocket and told me to buy myself a warm dinner. She was the only person associated with my family who had ever shown me a shred of unprompted kindness. Does she know the extent of this exposure? I asked. David sighed through the phone. Based on my experience in corporate fraud cases, it is highly unlikely. The signature matches her handwriting, but the notary stamp looks irregular. Spouses are often coerced into signing these documents under the guise of routine paperwork. She is legally bound to a failing commercial lease and a mountain of unpaid contractor debt. When the creditors come to collect, they will garnish her teaching salary. Connor dragged her right down into the abyss with him. I looked at her signature on the digital screen. Connor had not just ruined his own life. He had systematically dismantled the financial future of his aging parents and his innocent wife. He had built a monument to his own ego using the literal shelter over their heads as the foundation. And Richard and Diane had willingly handed him the hammer. They invited me to dinner tomorrow night, I said, my voice dropping to a calm mechanical register. They are going to frame this as an exclusive investment opportunity. They are going to pitch me a fairy tale about a restaurant on the verge of national expansion. They want me to hand over the capital to make the foreclosure notice vanish. What is your directive? David asked. Do you want me to draft a cease and desist letter? We can legally bar them from soliciting funds from you. No, I replied. A cease and desist letter is quiet. A piece of paper delivered by a mail carrier does not hold them accountable. They have spent my entire life controlling the narrative. They spent decades telling everyone that Connor was a visionary and I was a cold, calculating disappointment. If I simply walk away, they will spend the rest of their lives playing the victims. They will tell the extended family that the greedy corporate daughter abandoned them in their hour of need. I am not going to allow them to write the ending to this story. I hit the print command on my keyboard. The heavy laser printer in the corner of my office hummed to life. I listened to the crisp sound of paper sliding through the mechanical rollers. The 30-day pre-foreclosure notice printed first. The three separate mechanic liens followed. The commercial lease agreement with Jessica's fragile signature printed last. I gathered the warm pages and stacked them neatly on my mahogany desk. I opened a drawer and retrieved a thick, unmarked manila folder. I slid the documents inside and folded the metal clasps down, sealing the financial reality into a portable weapon. David, I need you to clear your schedule for tomorrow evening, I instructed. I am a corporate attorney, Ward, he replied. My Friday evenings are usually reserved for expensive scotch and ignoring my phone. What exactly are we doing tomorrow night? We are attending a family dinner in the suburbs, I said, resting my hand flat on top of the manila folder. You are going to act as my legal witness. We are going to sit at their dining room table and listen to their entire fraudulent pitch. We are going to let them construct their elaborate lie, and then we are going to lay the public records right next to the pot roast. I heard a low whistle through the receiver. You are setting an ambush, David noted. I am delivering the data I corrected. Make sure you wear a suit, David. We want to project success. I terminated the call. I placed the manila folder inside my leather briefcase. The anxiety that had plagued me for the first 2 decades of my life was entirely gone. It was replaced by the cold, sterile certainty of a mathematician who had finally balanced an impossible equation. The Ward family had spent my entire existence betting on the wrong child. Tomorrow night the bill was finally coming due. Friday evening descended on Austin with a thick, humid heat that clung to the asphalt. I navigated the heavy traffic on the interstate, leaving the gleaming glass towers of the downtown district behind me. I was driving a newly purchased luxury sedan. The exterior was a deep, understated charcoal. The cabin was whisper quiet, filtering out the chaotic noise of the highway. The leather steering wheel felt smooth beneath my palms. I did not purchase the vehicle to show off. I purchased it because my previous car had a failing transmission and I required reliable transportation. But as I merged onto the familiar suburban streets of my childhood neighborhood, the contrast became impossible to ignore. The manicured lawns and identical brick facades looked exactly the same as they did when I was 17, yet everything felt entirely different. I was no longer the invisible daughter walking home from a grueling diner shift. I was a corporate strategist holding a manila folder filled with public records that could destroy the house I was approaching. David sat in the passenger seat beside me. He wore a tailored navy suit and a crisp white shirt. He held his leather briefcase resting flat on his knees. He looked out the tinted window, analyzing the neighborhood with the cold precision of a predator surveying a hunting ground. He did not speak a word. He understood the assignment. We were not here to socialize. We were here to document a financial execution. I turned the steering wheel and pulled into the concrete driveway of my parents' house. I shifted the vehicle into park and turned off the engine. Look above the garage doors, I instructed softly. David followed my gaze through the windshield. Hanging from the metal gutters was a white vinyl banner. The letters were printed in cheap red ink. The sign read, "Congratulations, Juliana." The right side of the banner was already sagging downward because the tape holding it to the brick was peeling in the heat. It was a pathetic, transparent prop. It was a visual representation of their sudden manufactured affection. They had spent 24 years offering me nothing but empty air, and now they hung a plastic sign over the driveway, hoping it would function as a receipt for a $5 million transaction. They spare no expense, David murmured. His voice was dry and devoid of pity. I opened the car door and stepped out into the stifling humidity. David followed suit. We walked up the cracked concrete path leading to the front porch. Before I could even raise my hand to press the doorbell, the heavy wooden door swung open. Richard stood in the threshold. He wore a light blue button-down shirt tucked into dark slacks. His hair was freshly combed. A wide, beaming smile stretched across his face. It was the exact smile he used when trying to placate an angry customer at the hardware store. "There she is," he announced loudly, stepping out onto the porch. "Our corporate star." He lunged forward and wrapped his arms around my shoulders. The hug was jarring. Richard had never been a physically affectionate man. He usually offered me a stiff pat on the back during holidays. This embrace was entirely performative. He squeezed me so tightly that my ribs ached. He smelled of cheap cedar cologne and nervous sweat. I stood perfectly rigid, enduring the physical contact without wrapping my arms around him in return. He pulled back, keeping his hands clamped firmly on my shoulders. "We are just so thrilled for you, kid," he said, looking directly into my eyes. "I always knew that big brain of yours would pay off someday." I offered a thin smile. "Thank you, Richard." He dropped his hands and finally noticed the man standing silently behind my left shoulder. Richard squared his stance, attempting to project paternal authority. "And who is this you brought to our family dinner?" "This is David," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "He is a colleague from Omnicorp. We were reviewing some logistical contracts downtown this afternoon, and he offered to accompany me. I hope you do not mind the extra guest." David stepped forward and extended his hand. The gesture was polite but firm. Richard grabbed his hand and shook it, pumping his arm a few times too many. "Any friend of Juliana is welcome at this table," Richard declared, attempting a hearty laugh. "Come on inside. Diane has been cooking all day." We crossed the threshold and stepped into the small foyer. The moment the front door closed behind us, a dense wall of culinary odors punched me in the face. The smell of roasted root vegetables, heavy beef fat, and thick brown gravy hung stagnant in the air. My stomach executed a slow, painful turn. Diane emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a floral-patterned apron. Her hair was styled and she wore pearl earrings. She gasped, placing a hand over her chest, as if she had not expected me to arrive at the exact time we had agreed upon. "Juliana, honey," she cooed, rushing forward to cup my cheeks in her warm palms. "You look so beautiful. Corporate life suits you perfectly." I endured her touch, stepping back gracefully after a few seconds. "Something smells very specific, Mom," I noted. "I made pot roast," Diane announced proudly, gesturing toward the dining room. "I know it is a family favorite. I wanted tonight to be special." I stared at her face, searching for a flicker of irony or realization. There was none. Pot roast was Connor's favorite meal. Diane prepared it every single year for his birthday dinner. I despised the dish. The texture of the boiled meat and the heavy sodium content of the gravy always made me feel physically ill. She had spent an entire afternoon cooking a celebratory dinner for me, and she prepared the one meal I loathed. It was a brilliant, undeniable proof that they still knew absolutely nothing about the daughter they were trying to extort. We moved from the foyer into the formal dining room. The table was set with the good china and polished silver. Connor was already seated near the window. The golden boy did not look golden tonight. He wore a wrinkled polo shirt. His posture was slumped. A thin sheen of sweat coated his forehead. He was bouncing his right leg rapidly under the table, rattling the glassware. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for the wind to push him over. Sitting next to him was Jessica. She wore a simple yellow sundress and her hair was tied back in a neat braid. When I walked into the room, her face lit up with a genuine, unscripted joy. She stood up immediately and crossed the room, wrapping me in a soft, warm embrace. "Juliana." "I am so proud of you, Jessica," whispered her voice, catching slightly. "I saw the article online. You worked so hard for this. You deserve every single ounce of success." "Thank you, Jessica," I replied, returning the hug. Looking at her open, honest face sent a sharp pang of regret through my chest. She was trapped in the blast radius of her husband's financial suicide. She had no idea that a legal document bearing her forged signature was currently sitting inside the briefcase resting by David's feet. Everyone took their designated seats around the oval table. David sat directly to my right, acting as a silent sentinel. Diane began passing the heavy serving dishes. She scooped a massive portion of the shredded brown meat and thick gravy onto my pristine white plate. I picked up my fork and pushed the food around, creating the illusion of participation. The manufactured pleasantries began immediately. Richard poured glasses of cheap red wine and proposed a toast to my new executive title. Diane asked superficial questions about the Omnicorp headquarters, pretending to care about the square footage of my office. Connor remained uncharacteristically quiet. He drank his wine in large, nervous gulps and kept his eyes fixed on his untouched plate. The tension in the dining room began to stretch like a tightened guitar string. Every forced smile felt brittle. Every hollow compliment echoed loudly in the quiet space. David sat perfectly still, sipping his ice water and observing the desperate actors performing their rehearsed lines. He was memorizing their lies. Richard tried to steer the conversation toward my salary, asking probing questions about liquid assets and corporate bonuses. Jessica derailed his efforts by asking me detailed questions about how my predictive algorithm actually functioned. She listened with genuine fascination while Richard and Connor shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. They did not care about the math. They only cared about the checkbook. The dinner dragged on for 40 excruciating minutes. The air grew heavier with each passing second. The wardmen were running out of small talk. They were circling the true purpose of the evening like vultures waiting for a wounded animal to collapse. They were preparing to launch their extortion pitch, and I sat there with my hands folded in my lap, waiting for them to finally drop the mask. Diane cleared the heavy ceramic plates from the dining room table. She returned moments later carrying a large glass baking dish. The scent of cinnamon and baked peaches temporarily masked the lingering odor of the roasted meat. She served generous portions of the warm cobbler into small porcelain bowls, placing one in front of each guest. The clatter of silverware against the fine china was the only sound occupying the room. Richard took a slow, measured sip of his red wine. He set the glass down and folded his hands atop the white tablecloth. The casual dinner host facade evaporated. The predator emerged. He cleared his throat. The low, rumbling sound commanded the immediate attention of the table. Juliana, Richard began. His voice dropped into a solemn, rehearsed cadence. Sitting here tonight watching you operate with such confidence brings a profound sense of pride to this family. You have secured a remarkable position. But the corporate world is a cold environment. Companies like Omnicorp do not care about you as an individual. They care about their profit margins. At the end of the day, blood is thicker than water. He paused, letting the cliché hang in the heavy air. True wealth. He continued, the kind of wealth that builds a lasting legacy is generated when a family pools their resources. It happens when we keep our capital in-house. We support our own. I did not touch my dessert. I kept my eyes fixed on his face. What exactly are you proposing, Richard? Richard leaned back in his chair, yielding the floor. Connor immediately straightened his posture. The nervous bouncing of his legs ceased. He transformed into the confident high school quarterback running a practice play. We are sitting on a gold mine, Juliana, Connor stated. He leaned forward with manufactured intensity. The Artisan Smokehouse concept is not just a local restaurant. It is a highly scalable franchise model. I have secured the most coveted commercial real estate in the Travis County retail corridor. We have the branding, we have the proprietary recipes. The market research indicates a significant gap in premium casual dining in this demographic. He paused to take a breath. His eyes were wide with feigned excitement. But to properly launch this brand and prepare it for national syndication, we need to bypass traditional banking delays. We need a fast, agile injection of capital to finalize the build-out and secure our initial inventory. I am talking about a tiny $400,000 investment. He dropped the number casually, as if asking for a $20 bill to cover a pizza delivery. We did not want to go to an outside venture capital firm, Richard interjected smoothly. We wanted to offer this exclusive investment opportunity to you first. We want you to hold a primary equity stake in your brother's empire. You provide the $400,000, and you own 20% of the national franchise rights. It is a guaranteed return. I looked at Connor. Then I looked at Richard. The sheer audacity of their performance was breathtaking. They were pitching a rotting, condemned construction site burdened by legal action as a national franchise opportunity. They were asking me to hand over nearly $500,000 to save their suburban home. They were disguising the desperate bailout as a financial favor to me. Beside me, David remained silent. He took a slow, calculated bite of his peach cobbler. His face revealed nothing. I did not shut down the pitch. I decided to give them enough rope to hang themselves. I shifted my posture, mirroring the authoritative stance I used during board meetings at the logistics headquarters. An exclusive equity investment, I repeated. My tone was clinical and detached. That is an intriguing proposition, Connor. But as a data strategist, I operate strictly on empirical evidence. Walk me through the financials. What are the specific terms of your commercial lease agreement? Connor swallowed hard. His confidence faltered for a fraction of a second before the lie rolled off his tongue. It is a standard 5-year agreement. The landlord is incredibly supportive of the vision. He even offered us a generous build-out allowance to cover the kitchen renovations. A generous allowance, I echoed, logging the blatant falsehood. The public records sitting in David's briefcase proved Connor signed a 10-year binding lease with zero landlord concessions. And the construction progress. Are the municipal permits secured? Richard jumped in to cover the hesitation. The construction is essentially complete, Juliana. We passed the city electrical and plumbing inspections last week. The crew is just putting the finishing touches on the drywall. We are ready to install the commercial appliances by Monday. It was a staggering fabrication. The city had tagged the building 3 weeks ago. The electrical wiring was a verified fire hazard. The plumbing was non-compliant. The drywall contractors had filed a mechanic lien for unpaid labor. Richard was looking me directly in the eye and constructing an alternate reality out of thin air. That sounds very efficient, I noted smoothly. However, a $400,000 capital injection requires substantial collateral to mitigate risk. What assets are you leveraging to secure my investment? The dining room grew uncomfortably warm. Diane shifted in her seat. Her gaze darted rapidly between her husband and her son. Richard offered a reassuring smile. The business itself is the primary collateral. Our projected first-year revenue exceeds $1.2 million. Beyond that, your mother and I are backing the venture. The house is fully paid off. We own it free and clear. That equity serves as an unstated safety net for the family. I felt a cold, sharp thrill race down my spine. The second mortgage, the $350,000 extraction. The pre-foreclosure notice printed on bank letterhead. Richard had just denied the existence of all of it in front of witnesses. I turned my attention to Jessica. She was watching Connor with open admiration. Connor has been working grueling hours at the site Jessica contributed. Her voice was filled with genuine pride. He is there every single morning managing the contractors. It is going to be a beautiful restaurant, Juliana. Her innocent endorsement made the deception infinitely more toxic. She truly believed her husband was building a future for them. She had no idea her forged signature was binding her to a financial catastrophe. I directed my gaze back to my brother. I leaned in slightly, narrowing my eyes. Let me be very precise, Connor. As an investor, I must account for all hidden liabilities. Are there any outstanding debts associated with this project? Any secondary loans? Any creditor liens filed against the property or your personal accounts? The room went dead silent. The only sound was the low hum of the central air conditioning unit. Connor looked at his father. Richard gave him a subtle, imperceptible nod. Connor turned back to me. He held my gaze without blinking. Zero debt, Juliana. We have cash flowed the entire operation up to this point. The property is clear. We are running a pristine ship. David, sitting quietly to my right, reached into the breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket. He retrieved a silver fountain pen and a small leather-bound notepad. He clicked the pen open and wrote a single line on the paper. The scratching sound of the metal nib against the crisp page echoed loudly in the tense silence. It was a purely psychological tactic, and it worked flawlessly. Connor tracked David's hand movements. A bead of sweat formed at his temple. I appreciate your transparency, I said, folding my hands neatly on the table. You have presented a very clear picture of the operational health of the smokehouse. I had methodically guided them through the labyrinth of their own deceit. I asked the precise questions necessary to force them to vocalize every single lie. They claimed the lease was favorable. They claimed the construction was permitted and complete. They claimed the family home was owned free and clear. They claimed there was zero debt and zero legal encumbrances. They had dug an inescapable trench. They stood at the very bottom of it, holding out their hands, waiting for me to toss down $400,000. They believed their performance was flawless. They believed I was still the naive, desperate girl seeking a seat at their table, easily manipulated by the promise of family inclusion. I looked at the plates of half-eaten peach cobbler. I looked at the cheap congratulatory banner visible through the dining room window. The extortion pitch was complete. The trap was fully loaded. All that remained was for me to spring it. I reached for the crystal water goblet resting next to my dinner plate. The condensation chilled my fingertips. I lifted the heavy glass and took a slow, deliberate sip. The cold liquid washed away the dry, metallic taste of tension building in the back of my throat. I set the goblet down on the white tablecloth. The crystal clinked softly against the polished wood underneath. "I am going to pass on the opportunity, Connor," I said. My voice was calm and entirely devoid of emotion. "I am declining the investment." The manufactured warmth in the dining room vanished instantly. The sudden drop in temperature was almost physical. Richard stopped swirling the red wine in his glass. Connor dropped his fork onto his plate with a loud clatter. Jessica looked back and forth between her husband and her father-in-law with genuine confusion. "What do you mean, you pass?" Richard asked. His tone was no longer smooth or accommodating. The paternal disguise slipped away, revealing the desperate man hiding underneath. "This is a guaranteed return on your capital, Juliana. We are offering you a chance to be part of a national brand. You do not just walk away from family when they offer you a seat at the table." "You do not have a national brand, Richard," I replied, maintaining my level gaze. "You have a gutted building and a desperate need for cash. I am not funding it." Diane slammed her palms flat against the dining room table. The sudden movement rattled the china plates and the silverware. Her face flushed a deep, angry red. The pearl earrings dangling from her earlobes shook as she glared at me. "You selfish, ungrateful child!" Diane hissed. Her voice climbed into a shrill, piercing register. "We invited you into our home to celebrate your success. We offered you a business opportunity because we wanted to include you. And you sit there, looking down your nose at your own brother." She stood up from her chair. She pointed a trembling finger at my face. "You owe this family," she demanded. "We raised you. We put a roof over your head. We fed you and clothed you for 18 years. You just signed a corporate contract and you refuse to help your brother when he needs a tiny fraction of that money. You are arrogant and heartless." I did not yell back. I did not raise my voice or defend my character. Anger requires an emotional investment, and my account was completely empty. I simply reached down and unlatched the brass locks on my leather briefcase resting on the floor. I pulled out the thick manila folder. I lifted it over the table and let it drop. The heavy stack of paper hit the polished mahogany with a loud, definitive thud. The sound echoed off the dining room walls, silencing my mother's screaming. "I do not owe this family a single cent," I stated. "But since you brought up the topic of history, I think we should review the actual timeline of events." I opened the folder. I pulled out the top sheet of paper. It was a typed ledger I had drafted earlier that afternoon. I read the dates aloud, letting the facts dismantle their narrative. May 12th, I read. "I walked across a university stage to accept a degree with the highest academic honors available. 3 reserved seats in Section D remained empty. My father, my mother, and my brother attended an amateur meat cooking contest instead." I moved down the list. May 15th. I finalized a corporate licensing contract worth $5 million. I did not notify my family because my family had not spoken to me in 4 weeks. I looked up from the paper and met my mother's furious stare. May 30th, I continued. An article regarding my financial success was published online. Within 14 minutes, I received 47 phone calls from this family. 3 days later, I was invited to eat pot roast and asked to hand over $400,000. Diane opened her mouth to argue, but the words died in her throat. The clinical presentation of her own behavior paralyzed her. Richard tried to intervene. "Juliana, this is entirely unnecessary," he warned. His voice carried a dark, threatening edge. "Put those papers away right now. We are your parents and we demand respect." "I am not finished, Richard," I said. I turned my head slightly to my right. David, you have the floor. David did not offer a polite smile. He did not introduce himself again. He simply placed his leather briefcase on his lap and snapped the latches open. He functioned like a highly efficient machine operating entirely on logic and legal statutes. He pulled out a stack of documents printed on formal legal-sized paper. He handed the first packet across the table to Connor. Connor stared at the pages like they were covered in venom. "These are public records retrieved from the county clerk this morning," David explained. His voice was deep and resonant, filling the silent room. "Those are 3 separate mechanic liens filed against your commercial property. The electrical union, the plumbing contractor, and the drywall supplier are suing you for unpaid labor. The total debt exceeds $40,000. The city inspectors revoked your building permits 21 days ago. Your restaurant is legally condemned." Connor went pale. He slumped back into his chair, unable to formulate a single syllable of defense. Jessica looked at her husband with wide, terrified eyes. "Connor, what is he talking about?" she whispered. Connor ignored her, keeping his eyes glued to the table. David reached into his briefcase again. He pulled out a second stack of documents. He slid this packet directly in front of Richard. "That is a copy of a secondary mortgage agreement," David stated. "It was finalized 8 months ago. The borrower is listed as Richard Ward. The collateral is this exact suburban property. The loan amount is $350,000. Diane stopped breathing. The air left her lungs in a sharp, sudden hiss. She looked from David to the papers resting in front of her husband. She reached out with a trembling hand and pulled the mortgage document toward her plate. She stared at the numbers printed in bold, black ink. "Richard." "What is this?" Diane asked. Her voice was barely a whisper. It trembled with a sudden rising panic. "You told me you took out a small personal line of credit to help Connor buy the kitchen appliances. You told me it was $20,000. Richard refused to look at his wife. He stared a hole into the dining room wall, his jaw clenched tight. "Diane, we can fix it," he muttered. "Do not do this right now. Not in front of them." David ignored the crumbling marriage and delivered the final fatal blow. He produced the last sheet of paper from his briefcase. It was printed on the official letterhead of a major national bank. He placed it directly in the center of the table, right next to the baked peach cobbler. "That is a formal notice of pre-foreclosure," David announced. The secondary lender accelerated the repayment schedule due to material breach of contract. "You failed to maintain the collateral value of the commercial site. The bank is demanding the immediate return of the $350,000. You have exactly 29 days remaining on the clock. If you do not produce the cash, this house will be seized and sold at public auction." Diane gasped. It was an ugly, guttural sound of pure terror. She dropped the mortgage papers and grabbed the pre-foreclosure notice. Her eyes scanned the legal jargon, frantically searching for a loophole that did not exist. The facade of the happy suburban family hosting a celebratory dinner shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. The unified front they had built to extort me imploded in real time. Diane turned her entire body toward Richard. The rage that had been directed at me just minutes prior found its true target. "You put a lien on our home," Diane screamed. Her voice echoed violently through the dining room. 30 years, Richard. We spent 30 years paying off this house. You leveraged our retirement to fund his delusions." Richard slammed his fist against the table. "I did it for the family," he roared back. "Connor needed the capital to secure the lease. It was an investment. If the contractors had just finished the job, we would be generating revenue right now. It is not an investment, Richard. It is a total disaster." Diane shrieked, tears of panic streaming down her face. "We are going to be homeless in a month. You lied to me. You sat in our kitchen and you looked me in the eye and you lied." Connor tried to defend his father. "Mom, calm down," Connor pleaded. "We just need a bridge loan. We just need a little more time to get the doors open. The concept is still solid." Diane whipped her head around and glared at her golden son. "Shut up, Connor," she snapped. Her voice was laced with a venom I had never heard her use against him. "You have never finished a single project in your entire life. You dragged your father into this, and you ruined us." The dining room devolving into a chaotic war zone. My parents were screaming at each other across the fine china. Connor was shrinking into his chair, burying his face in his hands. The polite suburban dinner party had transformed into a financial autopsy. I sat perfectly still, observing the destruction they had brought upon themselves. I had not raised my voice once. I had not thrown a single insult. I simply provided the data, and the data was tearing them apart. The dining room descended into absolute chaos. Diane stood over Richard. Her breathing was ragged and uneven. The formal space felt like a collapsing building. Richard refused to look up from the mahogany table. He kept muttering that the business model was sound and he just needed a bridge loan. Diane grabbed the edge of the table. "You mortgaged my life, Richard," she said. Her voice was flat and hollow. It carried more weight than her previous screaming. 30 years of marriage, and you threw it away for a restaurant that does not even have working plumbing. Richard tried to reach for her hand, but she recoiled. "Do not touch me," she warned. "You are a fool, and you made me a fool." While the parents dismantled their marriage at the head of the table, another disaster was quietly unfolding near the window. Jessica had been sitting in stunned silence. She watched Diane hyperventilate. She listened to the staggering figures of debt being thrown across the room. Then she looked at the stack of papers resting in front of Connor. David slid one final document across the white tablecloth. It was the commercial lease agreement. Jessica stared at the signature page. I watched her eyes track down to the bottom right corner. She saw her own name written in dark blue ink. Jessica grew up in a household defined by strict financial discipline. Her parents were public school teachers who saved every penny to send her to college. She carried zero debt. She drove a 10-year-old car because she refused to live beyond her means. When she married Connor, she believed his ambitious talk. She thought he was just a late bloomer waiting for the right opportunity. She supported him emotionally and financially while he chased imaginary ventures. Now she was staring at a 10-year commercial lease bearing her forged signature. Jessica picked up the paper. Her hands shook so violently the crisp sheet rattled in the quiet room. "Connor, what is this?" she asked. Her voice was barely a whisper. Connor looked trapped. He stared at his half-empty wine glass, refusing to meet her eyes. Jessica pushed her chair back. The wood scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. "You forged my name," she stated. "It was not a question. You tied me to a condemned building and $40,000 of unpaid labor. You made me a guarantor on a lease I never saw." Connor reached out to her. "Jessie, please," he begged. "The landlord required a spousal signature. I knew you would not understand the vision. I was trying to protect you from the stress. I was going to pay it all off before you ever found out. It was just a formality." Jessica stood up. Her yellow sundress looked painfully out of place in the toxic environment. "You did not protect me, Connor," she said. "You ruined me." She dropped the lease agreement onto his dinner plate, right on top of the untouched pot roast. "I am leaving," she announced. She did not yell. The quiet certainty in her voice was devastating. She turned her back on her husband and walked out of the formal dining room. The heavy oak front door clicked shut a moment later. Connor buried his face in his hands. He let out a low, pathetic sob. The illusion of the Ward family was entirely pulverized. The golden son was a fraud facing divorce and bankruptcy. The patriarch was weeks away from foreclosure. The matriarch was staring at a future of sudden poverty. I sat perfectly still in my chair. I took a slow sip of my ice water. I watched the fire burn. They had gathered the kindling and poured the gasoline themselves. I simply handed them the match. Richard looked around the ruined dining room. He saw his wife refusing to speak to him. He saw his son crying into a linen napkin. He realized he had run out of lies. The predator act vanished. The confident host disappeared. He turned his attention back to me. His eyes were red and wide with genuine terror. The pride he had worn like a suit of armor for 24 years evaporated. "Juliana, please," Richard begged. His voice cracked. He leaned across the table, abandoning all pretense of an investment pitch. "I know I made a mistake. I know I mishandled the finances. I should not have hidden the second mortgage. But you have $5 million. $350,000 is nothing to you now. It is a fraction of your signing bonus. You can write a check tomorrow morning and make this all go away. He pointed a shaking finger at the pre-foreclosure notice resting near the peach cobbler. They are going to take the house, Juliana. They are going to throw your mother and me out onto the street. We will lose everything we have worked for. You cannot let that happen. We are your blood. I am your father. I am asking you to save my life. Diane stopped crying. She looked at me with a desperate, pathetic hope. She hated me just 10 minutes prior, but now she saw me as a human automated teller machine. Juliana, please, she whispered. We will pay you back. Every single penny. We will sign whatever loan documents you want. Just help us keep our home. I looked at the two people who had spent my entire existence ignoring my potential. They did not apologize for missing my graduation. They did not express regret for calling my academic honors pointless. They did not acknowledge the years of neglect or the blatant favoritism that led them to this exact moment. They only cared about the capital my intellect had generated. They viewed me as a utility. I was a resource to be tapped when the golden boy failed to deliver a return on their investment. I turned my head and nodded to David. David reached into his leather briefcase one final time. He retrieved a single sheet of heavy legal paper. He placed it directly in front of me, aligning the edges perfectly with the edge of the table. I pushed the document across the table toward Richard. This is a voluntary relinquishment of inheritance and financial obligation, I explained. My voice was calm and deliberate. It states that I waive all rights to any future inheritance from your estate. In exchange, it legally severs me from any of your debts, liabilities, or financial encumbrances. It confirms that I owe you absolutely nothing. Richard stared at the bold text at the top of the page. He looked completely bewildered. What are you doing? He asked. I am protecting my assets, I replied. I will not fund your dysfunction. I will not pay for Connor's fraudulent restaurant. I will not save this house. You made a series of highly irrational investments based on emotional bias. The data clearly indicates that bailing you out would yield a negative return. You are a terrible investment, Richard. Richard stared at the legal document, his face contorted in disbelief. You are abandoning us, he whispered. I am matching your historical investment in my life, I corrected. I demand that you sign this document right now. Both you and Diane must sign it. If you refuse to sign it, I will instruct David to forward the forged lease agreement to the district attorney. Forging a signature on a commercial lease is a felony, Connor. You will go to state prison. Connor lifted his head from his hands. His face was blotchy and pale. Dad, just sign it, Connor pleaded. Please sign it. I cannot go to jail. The dining room grew so quiet, I could hear the central air conditioning kick on, pushing cold air through the overhead vents. Richard picked up the silver fountain pen David had left on the table. He hovered the metal tip over the signature line. His hand trembled. He looked up at me with a mixture of hatred and profound desperation. He realized I held all the leverage and I was willing to use it without mercy. How can you be so cold? Richard asked. His voice was thick with resentment. You are sitting there letting a faceless bank destroy your own family. You have the power to stop the foreclosure, but you are choosing to watch us drown. What kind of person does that? I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the edge of the table. The final piece of the puzzle was ready to be slotted into place. I looked directly into his eyes, preparing to deliver the reality that would break him completely. Richard gripped the silver fountain pen so hard his knuckles turned white. He glared at me across the ruins of his dining room table. He was trembling. A faceless bank is going to steal the only home your mother and I have ever owned, he spat. His voice was laced with a desperate venom. They are going to throw us out onto the street over a single bad investment. You have the capital to stop them. You have the power to erase this entire nightmare. But you are choosing to sit there and watch your own blood drown. What kind of monster does that? I kept my hands folded neatly on my lap. I did not raise my voice. I let his accusations echo off the walls and fade into the silence. Look at the document resting next to your wine glass, Richard, I said. My tone was conversational and entirely flat. Look at the pre-foreclosure notice. Look at the top left corner of the page. Read the name of the institution threatening to seize your property. Richard blinked. He tore his gaze away from my face and looked down at the paper. His eyes scanned the bold black text printed near the margins. It says Omni Financial, he read aloud. His brow furrowed in confusion. He did not understand the correlation. He was a retail manager who operated in a small suburban bubble. He did not comprehend the architecture of modern corporate conglomerates. Omnicorp is a $25 billion logistics empire, I explained, leaning forward slightly. But a corporation of that size does not simply move freight across highways. They diversify their capital. They own real estate holdings. They own shipping ports. And they operate a highly aggressive financial subsidiary called Omni Financial. They purchase high-risk secondary mortgages bundled from smaller regional credit unions. They buy bad debt at a discount and enforce strict collection protocols. Richard stared at me. The silver pen hovered over the relinquishment document. The color began to drain from his face as the syllables slowly registered in his mind. When Elias Thorne hired me to optimize their global network, my mandate was not limited to delivery trucks. I continued. My algorithm is designed to identify inherent instability in any complex system. 3 weeks ago, the executive board granted me full administrative access to the Omni Financial asset portfolio. They instructed me to locate toxic debt and streamline the recovery process. They wanted me to purge the irrecoverable losses from their ledgers. I paused, letting the reality of my corporate authority settle over the dining room. Connor was holding his breath. Diane was gripping the edge of the table, her knuckles stark white against the dark wood. Last Tuesday afternoon, my algorithm flagged a highly unstable commercial lease in Travis County, I said, keeping my eyes locked on Richard. The code identified a 10-year binding contract linked to a property with revoked municipal permits. It detected 3 outstanding mechanic liens. It calculated the revenue projections for the tenant and determined the business model was a statistical failure. The algorithm categorized the loan as toxic. I watched the realization hit my father. His jaw went slack. The pen slipped from his fingers and rolled across the white tablecloth, leaving a thin trail of black ink in its wake. The system generated a risk assessment report, I stated. I pulled the file onto my monitor. I reviewed the names attached to the liability. I saw Connor Ward listed as the primary tenant. I saw Jessica Ward listed as the fraudulent spousal guarantor. And I saw Richard Ward listed as the secondary mortgage holder, utilizing a suburban residential property as the primary collateral. You found the loan, Richard whispered. The venom in his voice was gone. It was replaced by a hollow echoing dread. I did not just find the loan, Richard, I corrected him. I audited it. The standard corporate protocol for a toxic asset bearing 3 unmitigated contractor liens is immediate acceleration of the debt. The algorithm recommended invoking the material breach clause to protect the parent company from further financial exposure. It suggested issuing a 30-day pre-foreclosure notice to secure the residential collateral before other creditors could lay claim to it. Diane let out a sharp, trembling gasp. She pressed both hands over her mouth. Her eyes were wide with a terror that bordered on madness. But a computer program cannot initiate a foreclosure on its own, I explained. My voice remained smooth and rhythmic. It requires human authorization. A senior executive must review the data, confirm the breach of contract, and sign the directive. A vice president must press the final button to unleash the legal department. I reached across the table and tapped my index finger against the bank letterhead resting near the peach cobbler. I am the lead predictive strategist for the southern region, I said. I am the senior executive who reviewed your portfolio. I read every single line of your commercial lease. I examined the mechanic liens. I looked at the second mortgage you secretly extracted from this house. I evaluated the risk and I determined that you were an irrecoverable loss. The silence in the dining room became suffocating. The air conditioning kicked off, leaving the space entirely devoid of background noise. I authorized the foreclosure, Richard Weiss stated. The words landed like concrete blocks dropping onto the table. I signed the digital directive last Thursday. I instructed the legal department to draft that exact notice you are holding. I am the faceless bank you are complaining about. My algorithm condemned your fraud and my signature finalized your eviction. Connor let out a sound that was half whimper and half choke. He pushed his chair back from the table, trying to put physical distance between himself and the reality I had just outlined. He looked at me as if I had suddenly transformed into an apex predator sitting in his childhood dining room. You did this, Connor stammered, his voice cracking. You destroyed us. You destroyed yourselves, I countered, shifting my gaze to my brother. You built a house of cards using stolen money and forged signatures. You decided to play a game of high-stakes finance without understanding the rules. I simply processed the data you generated. I treated you with the exact same objective indifference that you showed me for 24 years. You wanted me to be part of the family business. This is my contribution. Richard looked down at the pre-foreclosure notice. He saw the document not as a piece of paper, but as a loaded weapon I had personally aimed at his chest. The daughter he had dismissed as pointless had weaponized her intellect to dismantle his entire existence. He had spent his evening trying to extort $400,000 from the very architect of his destruction. You are a sociopath, Diane cried out. Her voice was thin and reedy, breaking under the weight of her panic. You sat in our house eating our food knowing you had already signed the papers to take our home away. I did not eat your food, Diane, I replied, glancing at the untouched plate of pot roast. I came here to execute a contract. Your husband attempted to pitch me a fraudulent investment to pay off a debt that I am actively collecting. It is a brilliant irony, but it does not change the math. I pushed the relinquishment of inheritance form closer to Richard. The fountain pen was still resting on the tablecloth, leaking a small pool of ink into the fabric. You have 29 days remaining to produce $350,000, I reminded him. My corporate division does not grant extensions. We do not negotiate with delinquent accounts. The sheriff will arrive at this address on the final day of the month to enforce the eviction. You need every second of your time to figure out your living arrangements. I suggest you stop wasting my time and sign the severance document. Richard reached out with a trembling hand. He picked up the silver pen. His fingers were slick with nervous sweat. He looked at the signature line. He looked at the pre-foreclosure notice bearing the logo of the company I represented. He finally understood the gravity of his miscalculation. He had brought a plastic trophy to a corporate execution. Sign it, Richard, I commanded. My voice held zero warmth and zero forgiveness. Sign it, and I will walk out that front door. You will never have to look at my face again, and I will never have to pretend you were a father to me. Richard pressed the metal nib against the thick legal paper. He did not argue. He did not offer another defense. He was a defeated man staring into an abyss of his own making. He wrote his name in jagged, uneven letters. He passed the paper to his wife. Diane signed it while weeping openly, her tears dropping onto the page and smudging the ink. They pushed the completed document back across the table. I picked it up, checking the signatures for clarity. The trap had functioned flawlessly. The data had prevailed. The emotional ties were officially severed, and the financial liabilities were permanently contained. I had won. The silence in the dining room transformed into something physical. It was a suffocating pressure that pressed against the floral wallpaper and the vintage chandelier. The screaming had ceased. The panic had burned itself out, leaving behind a thick residue of shock. I pulled the relinquishment document across the white tablecloth. The signatures of my parents sat at the bottom of the page. The ink was still damp, reflecting the dim light of the room. They had surrendered their legal claim to my future. I looked at the people sitting around the table. The poetic justice of the moment was so profound it paralyzed them. Richard stared at the pre-foreclosure notice bearing the Omni Financial logo. His eyes traced the signature block at the bottom of the letter. He was finally processing the reality that the eviction mandate was authorized by the exact same daughter he had deemed pointless. Diane sat beside him. Her shoulders were slumped. She looked smaller than she had ever appeared in my entire life. She was a woman who had staked her entire identity on the projected success of her son. That projection had just collapsed, leaving her with a condemned commercial property and a 30-day countdown to homelessness. A sudden movement in the foyer broke the stagnant air. Jessica reappeared in the arched doorway of the dining room. She had not left the house when she walked away from the table earlier. She had gone upstairs to the master bedroom. She was holding a dark canvas duffel bag packed with whatever belongings she could gather in 10 minutes. Her face was pale, but her jaw was set with a rigid determination. Jessica grew up the daughter of two public school teachers who taught her the harsh realities of mathematics. She understood the concept of compound interest, and she understood the definition of fraud. She had spent 2 years attempting to build a stable life with Connor. She had overlooked his chronic unemployment because he promised her a vision of corporate success. But Jessica never subscribed to the sunk cost fallacy. When the data proved the investment was toxic, she knew exactly how to cut her losses. She walked up to the edge of the dining room table. She did not look at Richard or Diane. She looked directly at her husband. Connor lifted his head. His eyes were red and swollen. He reached a hand out toward her, hoping for a reprieve. "Jessie, please," Connor whispered. His voice was fragile. "Where are you going? We can figure this out. I will get a job. I will fix the paperwork." Jessica did not offer him a trace of sympathy. She reached for her left hand. She grasped the modest diamond ring resting on her finger. She pulled the metal band over her knuckle and placed it gently onto the white tablecloth. The gold clinked against the fine china. "You forged my signature on a 10-year commercial lease, Connor," she said. Her tone was devoid of anger. It was filled with a cold, unyielding clarity. "You tied my teaching salary to a $40,000 mechanic lien. You lied to my face every single morning when you kissed me goodbye and told me the restaurant was coming together. There is no figuring this out. You are a financial predator, and I will not let you drag me into bankruptcy." Connor opened his mouth to formulate an excuse, but the words failed to materialize. He stared at the wedding band resting next to his wineglass. The ultimate symbol of his failure was sitting right in front of him. Jessica turned her attention away from her ruined marriage. She looked across the table at David. The corporate attorney was still sitting quietly observing the fallout with detached professionalism. "Excuse me, David," Jessica said, maintaining her composure. "You operate in the corporate legal sector. You clearly understand how to navigate complex financial fraud. Do you possess a referral for a ruthless divorce attorney practicing in Travis County? I need someone who specializes in severing assets and protecting victims of spousal identity theft." David reached into the breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket. He did not hesitate. He retrieved a heavy cardstock business case and extracted a sleek black business card. He slid the card across the mahogany table toward Jessica. "Call the number on the back of the card tomorrow morning," David instructed, his voice smooth and authoritative. "Ask for the senior partner. Tell them David sent you, and tell them you require an expedited filing based on financial fraud. They will shield your teaching salary from the commercial creditors. They are expensive, but they will destroy his legal standing before the weekend is over." "Thank you, David," Jessica replied, taking the card and slipping it into her pocket. She picked up her duffel bag. "She looked at me one final time." She offered a small, tight nod of solidarity. She turned on her heel and walked down the hallway. The heavy oak front door opened and closed. The sound of her car starting in the driveway drifted through the windows, fading into the distance. She was gone. Connor buried his face in his hands again. He was weeping openly now. The golden boy of the Ward family was left with nothing but a rusted smoker and a mountain of legal summons. Richard and Diane did not attempt to comfort their son. They were too consumed by their own impending ruin. They sat in the wreckage of their blatant favoritism. For 2 decades, they had poured every spare dollar, every ounce of emotional support, and every shred of parental pride into Connor. They had starved me of basic affection to fund his imaginary empires. And now the final receipt had been printed. The investment yielded a negative return that would cost them their shelter. I picked up the silver fountain pen David had provided. I uncapped it and pressed the nib against the bottom of the relinquishment document. I signed my full legal name next to the signatures of my parents. The friction of the metal against the paper was the only sound in the room. I applied my personal corporate seal to the bottom corner, formalizing the contract. I separated the carbon copies of the document. I took the original bound pages and handed them to David. He slid the paperwork into his leather briefcase, securing the brass latches with a crisp click. I took the duplicate copy of the severance agreement. I reached across the table and placed the papers directly next to the glass baking dish of untouched peach cobbler. I positioned the foreclosure notice right beside it. The Omni Financial logo was facing Richard, serving as a permanent reminder of the daughter he had underestimated. "You have your copy of the agreement," I stated, standing up from my chair. I smoothed the wrinkles from my skirt. "You have the notice of default from my corporate division. You know exactly how many days you possess before the sheriff arrives to change the locks on your doors." Diane looked up at me. Her face was streaked with ruined makeup. "Juliana," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "Where are we supposed to go? How are we supposed to survive this?" I looked down at the woman who had dismissed my academic honors as a waste of time. I looked at the man who had called my data degree pointless. I looked at the brother who had stolen their future to stroke his own ego. "I suggest you start practicing some of that real-world grit Richard is always talking about," I replied. "The time for relying on other people to fund your life has expired." I did not wait for a response. I turned my back on the dining room and walked toward the foyer. David followed closely behind me, his footsteps silent on the hardwood floor. I did not look back at the family photos lining the hallway. I did not look at the living room where I had spent countless holidays feeling entirely alone. I reached the front door, turned the brass knob, and stepped outside. The warm Texas night embraced me instantly. The oppressive humidity of the afternoon had broken, leaving behind a gentle evening breeze. The sound of crickets chirping filled the suburban silence. The air smelled of cut grass and distant rain. It was the exact same neighborhood I had walked through as a teenager, but the environment no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a stage I had just conquered. I walked down the cracked concrete driveway. I passed under the cheap, sagging congratulatory banner hanging from the garage. It fluttered weakly in the wind. I approached the sleek charcoal sedan parked near the curb. I pressed the key fob and the locks disengaged with a sharp mechanical chirp. I opened the driver's side door and slid into the leather seat. David opened the passenger door and settled in beside me. He placed his briefcase on the floorboards. The interior of the car was quiet and insulated. I inserted the key into the ignition and the engine purred to life. I gripped the steering wheel. I waited for the surge of guilt that society tells daughters they are supposed to feel when they abandon their parents. I waited for a trace of sadness or a pang of regret. I scanned my internal emotional data looking for any sign of remorse. There was nothing. The ledgers were perfectly balanced. The accounts were closed. I shifted the car into drive. I pressed my foot against the accelerator. The vehicle glided forward, leaving the driveway and the brick house behind in the rearview mirror. I drove down the quiet residential street, navigating the familiar turns, until we reached the on-ramp for the interstate highway. David adjusted his suit jacket and looked over at me. "You executed that with a level of precision I rarely see in a courtroom, Ward," he noted. His tone held a rare note of genuine professional respect. "I just let the math do the talking, David," I replied, keeping my eyes on the road ahead. The numbers never lie. I merged onto the highway, heading back toward the downtown Austin skyline. The glittering lights of the city illuminated the horizon. I was driving toward my penthouse, toward my corporate headquarters, toward a life I had built with my own two hands. I felt an overwhelming sensation wash over me. It was not triumph or vindication. It was a profound, undeniable weightlessness. The burden of the Ward family was gone. I was finally free. 6 months passed. The brutal Texas heat surrendered to a crisp, mild winter. The landscape of my daily life shifted along with the seasons. I stood at the head of a sprawling mahogany conference table in the OmniCorp global headquarters in New York. The projection screen behind me displayed a steady climbing line graph, plotting out the quarterly metrics. My predictive routing algorithm had been fully integrated across all North American and European logistics hubs. The system did not just save the company money, it revolutionized their entire operational framework. Elias Thorne sat at the opposite end of the table. He folded his hands and looked at the fiscal report printed in front of him. The data showed a reduction in freight loss, totaling $1.2 billion. The code had successfully anticipated an unannounced dock worker strike on the eastern seaboard and rerouted 6,000 shipping containers before the ports even closed. The board of directors remained dead silent, absorbing the sheer scale of the recovered capital. Elias stood up and addressed the room. He did not ask for a vote or deliberate with the committee. He announced a structural change effective immediately. He named me Vice President of Predictive Strategy. I was given a dedicated floor in the Austin Tower, a team of 50 senior data scientists, and an 8-figure stock option package. I accepted the promotion with a simple nod. I did not call anyone to celebrate. The validation existed entirely in the math. While I ascended to the executive ranks, the natural consequences of my family's choices settled into their final, concrete forms. The 30-day pre-foreclosure clock had expired without a miracle intervention. The bank executed the seizure protocol with clinical efficiency. The sheriff arrived on a Tuesday morning to change the locks on the suburban brick house. Richard and Diane were forced to pack 3 decades of accumulated possessions into rented cardboard boxes, while the neighbors watched from their front lawns. The property was liquidated at a county auction 3 weeks later to satisfy the outstanding debt. I drove past the old neighborhood once on my way to a regional distribution center. A young couple from California had purchased the property. They had already hired landscaping contractors to rip out Diane's beloved rose bushes and paint the exterior brick a stark modern gray. The metal gutters that once held the cheap congratulatory banner were replaced. The physical footprint of the Ward family legacy was erased from the street, as if we had never lived there. Richard and Diane were forced to relocate to a cramped 2-bedroom apartment situated adjacent to a noisy interstate highway. Their new reality was dictated by the strict boundaries of a fixed income and severely damaged credit. The stress of the eviction and the public humiliation fractured whatever remained of Richard's professional standing. He began arriving late to his retail management job. He made erratic inventory decisions that cost his employer thousands of dollars. The regional director terminated his employment right before the holiday shopping season. The man who loved to lecture me about real-world grit was now stocking shelves on the graveyard shift at a local grocery store just to cover his monthly rent. He spent his nights scanning barcodes under flickering fluorescent lights for people he used to supervise. Diane experienced a similar plunge into the harsh mechanics of survival. She could no longer rely on the equity of a paid-off home to fund her leisure and project an image of suburban superiority. She swallowed her pride and accepted the exact $15 an hour administrative assistant position at the dental clinic she had once condescendingly offered to me. She spent her days answering ringing telephones, organizing patient files, and enduring complaints from the office manager about her slow typing speed. She and Richard lived in close quarters, listening to the rumble of semi-trucks rattling their thin apartment windows every time a convoy drove past on the highway. They had nobody to blame for the noise but the reflection in their own bathroom mirror. Connor's downfall was the most mathematically precise. The creditors descended on the artisan's smokehouse property like a swarm of locusts. The commercial landlord locked the doors and seized all the interior assets to cover the broken lease penalties. The rusted meat smoker he proudly displayed on social media was hauled away by a repossession company on a flatbed tow truck in broad daylight. Jessica proved to be the most efficient variable in the entire equation. She contacted the senior partner David had recommended on the back of his business card. The legal team filed an emergency injunction that shielded her teaching salary from the contractor liens. They proved Connor committed fraud by forging her signature on the commercial lease agreement. The divorce was fast and devoid of any sentimentality. The judge finalized the separation in less than 90 days. The court awarded Jessica a significant portion of Connor's future earnings to compensate for the legal trauma and the breach of fiduciary duty. To pay off his court-ordered alimony and his remaining unshielded debts, Connor was forced to enter the actual workforce. He could no longer hide behind the title of a visionary entrepreneur or rely on his high school football glory. He secured a job working the overnight shift as a prep cook at a 24-hour diner located off the highway. It was the exact same diner chain I had worked for when I was 17 years old. He spent his nights wearing a grease-stained canvas apron chopping onions and scrubbing burnt food off the flat-top grill. The smell of old fryer oil lingered on his skin long after his shifts ended. The golden boy was now turning over tables for minimum wage. I sat in my corner office on the top floor of the Omnicorp Tower, looking out over the glittering Austin skyline. My assistant placed a cup of black coffee on my desk and quietly closed the glass door. I watched the traffic flow across the bridges below, analyzing the patterns of movement. Society conditions children to believe they owe an unpayable debt to the people who brought them into the world. We are taught to absorb the dysfunction, to swallow the insults, and to act as a human shield against the consequences of our parents' choices. For 24 years, I allowed Richard, Diane, and Connor to use me as a buffer. I absorbed their neglect so they could maintain the illusion of a perfect family. I believed my intelligence was a tool designed to earn their elusive approval. The view from the executive suite offered a different perspective. I ran my fingers over the polished edge of my mahogany desk. I realized a profound truth that afternoon. I did not destroy the Ward family. I did not initiate a cruel vendetta or plot their demise. I simply stepped out of the way. When you remove the human shield, the consequences hit the intended targets. The bank foreclosed because they failed to pay their secondary mortgage. The marriage ended because Connor chose to commit felony fraud against his own wife. The social standing evaporated because it was built on a fragile foundation of lies. I did not orchestrate their ruin. I only provided the mirror that reflected their own behavior back at them. The algorithm of life had balanced the scales without any emotional interference from me. I opened my laptop and pulled up the predictive modeling for the next fiscal year. The numbers scrolling across the screen were clean, orderly, and entirely predictable. I felt a deep, settling peace in my chest. The chaotic noise of the past was permanently silenced. I typed a new line of code, adjusting a minor variable in a shipping route. I was building a future governed by logic and shielded by the firm boundaries I had finally drawn in the sand. I want to step back from the boardrooms and the logistics algorithms for a moment. I want to talk directly to you. If you have been listening to my story, you might be feeling a familiar weight in your chest. You might know exactly what it feels like to sit in a sweltering car looking at a social media post that proves you do not matter to the people who are supposed to love you the most. You might know the specific silence of an empty chair at a milestone event, and the cold realization that your best efforts will never be enough to earn their attention. We live in a modern American society that aggressively sells us a very specific narrative about loyalty. We are conditioned from childhood to believe that blood is an unbreakable contract. We are taught that family wealth, family secrets, and family burdens must be kept inside the house. The culture tells us to forgive everything. We are instructed to turn the other cheek to keep the peace and to honor our parents regardless of the cost to our own sanity or financial stability. But that narrative is a carefully constructed trap. It is a fairy tale designed to keep the most capable members of a family shackled to the most destructive ones. The people who demand the most loyalty are almost always the ones who have never demonstrated it. They use the concept of family as a currency to purchase your compliance. They expect you to act as a human shock absorber for their terrible decisions, their untreated egos, and their financial recklessness. I want to validate the ledger you have been keeping in your own mind. You are not crazy. You are not selfish for noticing the extreme imbalance. When you remember the exact number of times they dismissed your achievements, you are not being petty. You are simply collecting data. You are recognizing a pattern of behavior that they refuse to acknowledge, and you are finally deciding to hold them accountable for the math. There are people listening to this right now who are working double shifts just to keep their heads above water. You are studying late into the night. You are building quiet lives of competence and integrity. And yet when you walk into a family gathering, you are still treated like an afterthought. You are still the scapegoat, while someone else is crowned the golden child for simply breathing. I need you to understand a fundamental truth about your value. Your worth is not a variable that depends on their capacity to perceive it. The executives at Omnicorp did not give me my intellect. A $5 million licensing deal did not make me brilliant. I was already brilliant when I was 17 years old, scrubbing sticky booths at a roadside diner. I possessed the exact same analytical mind when I was wearing a grease-stained uniform as I did when I was wearing a tailored corporate suit. The corporate world simply attached a market price to my existing value. My parents lacked the currency to afford it. You do not need a massive corporate buyout to validate your existence. Your resilience is already your greatest asset. Every time you show up for yourself when no one else does, you are building an undeniable fortress. You are writing your own code and securing your own future. I want to revisit a specific phrase my father used during our last phone call before my graduation. He talked about real-world grit. He believed that grit was measured by loud declarations and reckless gambles. He thought it meant taking massive risks with money you did not have and expecting the universe to reward your arrogance. Society often celebrates that loud performative version of hustle, but true grit is entirely silent. True grit is working a 10-hour shift on your feet and going home to study for a final exam. True grit is carrying the heavy burden of being the responsible child while watching someone else receive all the praise. It is the quiet discipline of showing up every single day to build a foundation that nobody else can see. If you are the person holding your life together with that kind of silent endurance, you possess more real-world grit than anyone who simply talks about their grand visions. I also want to address the physical toll of holding on to the hope that your family will change. For years, I walked around with a constant tightness in my shoulders. I was always bracing for the next disappointment. I monitored my phone constantly, expecting a message that would finally validate my efforts. Living in that state of hypervigilance drains your physical energy. It consumes the cognitive bandwidth you could be using to innovate and create the life you actually want. When you finally let go of the expectation that they will suddenly become the parents or siblings you deserve, your body actually relaxes. The central nervous system stops treating every family interaction like a threat. You begin to sleep through the night. You begin to enjoy the taste of your food without a side of manufactured guilt. The absence of their drama leaves a massive void in your daily routine, and you get to fill that void with profound peace. In modern American society, we have the unprecedented freedom to select our own chosen families. We are not bound to the geography of our birth or the genetic lottery of our bloodlines. You have the absolute right to assemble a network of peers, mentors, and friends who function as a supportive board of directors for your life. You can choose people who celebrate your victories without jealousy. You can surround yourself with individuals who offer constructive guidance instead of extractive demands. When you finally decide to stop funding the dysfunction of your relatives, the pushback will be severe. They will call you heartless. They will label you arrogant. They will accuse you of abandoning them in their hour of need. They will deploy every emotional manipulation tactic they have honed over the decades. They will try to convince the rest of the world that you are the villain of the story. Let them. You cannot control the narrative they spin to their neighbors or their extended relatives. Attempting to correct their lies is a massive waste of your energy. You must look at the empirical evidence of your own life. The numbers do not support their version of reality, and the data will always set you free. Walking away from a toxic bloodline is never a betrayal. It is an act of profound self-preservation. You are not cutting them off out of malice or a desire for revenge. You are simply refusing to finance your own destruction. You are choosing to stop pouring your hard-earned resources into a black hole of entitlement and delusion. Boundaries are not walls designed to punish other people. Boundaries are the doors you install to protect the life you have painstakingly built. The aftermath of severing those ties is often portrayed as a tragic event. People expect you to carry a lingering sorrow, but the reality is far more peaceful than the movies suggest. The first time you wake up in a home that you pay for entirely on your own, without dreading a manipulative phone call, you will understand the true meaning of wealth. Peace is the ultimate luxury. It is a quiet, unbothered existence where your success belongs entirely to you. You do not have to wait for an apology that is never going to arrive. You do not have to force a confrontation at a formal dining room table like I did. Sometimes the most effective response is total silence. The greatest revenge is living a beautiful life that is entirely unaffected by their existence. If you are currently sitting in the middle of your own chaotic family dynamic, I want you to take a deep breath. Look at the concrete facts of your situation. Strip away the emotional conditioning and evaluate the returns on your investment. If the people around you are actively diminishing your potential, it is time to close the account. You possess the strength to build a new network of people who respect your mind and value your contributions. Thank you for listening to my story today. I hope it provided the clarity you might have been seeking in your own life. The world is vast and filled with opportunities that do not require you to diminish your own light to make other people comfortable. Keep building your algorithms, keep protecting your energy, and always remember the final lesson I learned on that warm Texas evening. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do with a seat at the table is to stand up and walk away.